Hi, good evening. On behalf of the Likely Story Bookstore and Carroll County Public Library, welcome to Be Read with Marie Bostwick. I'm Debbie Scheller, owner of the Likely Story Bookstore. We would like to also thank and welcome our promotional partners, the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, and the Ruth N. Loeb Library of Garrett County. We are happy to have you all tune in for our event and hope you will join us for some of our upcoming events. Next Tuesday, we will be having March 9th, a Likely Story will be hosting with HarperCollins, Kate Quinn. Please visit our website for more information. On May 24th, we will continue our To Be Read series with Lisa Scottoline and in conversation with Pam Denoff. And on March 30th, we will be hosting Stephanie Dre's book launch party for The Woman of Chateau Lafayette. Please visit either a Likely Story Bookstore's website or Carroll County Public Library's website for all the information on these and more events. Marie Bostwick is a USA Today and New York Times bestselling author of 18 uplifting novels, both historical fiction and women's fiction, including the popular series of books Cobbled, Quilt, and Too Much Texas. Marie's novel, The Second Sister, was adapted into a 2018 Hallmark Hall of Fame feature film, Christmas Everlasting, starring Patti LaBelle. The Thread of Truth, one of the Cobbled Quilt novels, was named an Indie Next Notable by the American Booksellers Association Indie Next Picks. The Restoration of Celia Fairchild is Marie's 19th novel. The Restoration of Celia Fairchild's release just this Tuesday. We have signed copies. Marie was kind enough to give us book plates, and we also have these special stickers that she had made for the Restoration of Celia Fairchild. The Restoration of Celia Fairchild has a main protagonist of Celia. She is the writer behind the immensely popular advice column, Dear Calpurnia. She has branded herself and built her identity and life around this. It is, despite her divorce and single woman status now, the reason an adoption agency agrees to move forward with her application after she is shortlisted for a placement. One afternoon, however, this last-ditch hope for motherhood hangs in the balance when she loses her column to a media conglomerate and receives news that she has inherited her aunt's estate in Charleston. With nothing left for her in New York City, Celia says goodbye to her former life. When she arrives in Charleston, the grand house she once remembered has fallen into disrepair. But the community of Charleston is more than ready to welcome her. With a cast of colorful characters and forgotten figures from her distant past, Celia begins to restore the historic house to its stately prime. And with it, dares to imagine a different future for herself, her newfound family, and the child she so desperately wants. Filled with hope, wit, and quiet wisdom, The Restoration of Celia Fairchild is a balm for the soul. Welcome, Marie. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Debbie. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. A balm for the soul. Boy, that is really a great quote. That is really that feeds into this so well, and it really brings it all together. There were a lot of great quotes through this that we'll talk about, but you had some really awesome authors that gave you some blurbs and some great quotes, and some of them we've even had there. You had Adriana Triani talk, and you had Susan Wiggs and Jane Green, all great authors. That
Addie Dawson.
It's some beautiful.
There's a bunch more.
Right. And high praise.
Get on the cover. No, I was, the early response. Sometimes you finish a book and you've got something special. And that's the way I felt when I finished Celia. So one of the hardest things for an author to do is to ask other authors to read their book, because
this was well worth it. I can't tell everybody how, and it was good for the times, because this is a feel-good book. This is a book you want to read right now, because it really is an uplifting book. It's a feel-good book, yet it has grit in it. It has stuff in it that really is takes you into the story, but your humor is fantastic.
And, you know, I am so excited because I have 3 sons, and for decades they have assured me that I am not funny.
Oh my gosh.
It has been very I've always thought I was. So it's been very gratifying to get so many of the reviews saying that this book is hilarious, which I think it kind of is in spots. So I've been sending them.
I mean, it grabs the very first page when she's, you know, talking about walking out on stage and she felt, you know, it really is very, very funny. It's very heartwarming, and it's a good book for this time. I'm very happy. Now, Celia, we're going to get into the book first, and then we'll go into some other things. But Celia is an advice columnist who really doesn't take her own advice. She really should.
You kind of froze on me. So can you ask the question again?
Okay, so Celia is an advice columnist who does not take her own advice usually. How did you come about with this type of character?
Well, it really wasn't very difficult. So it more than any book I've written for, at least for a very long time, there's a lot of me in this book. For reasons that have never been clear to me, people tell me their stuff, like a lot. Strangers on the street, practically. There's one situation that I remember very clearly. I was getting a pedicure, and I'd never been to this particular salon before, and I'd never met the pedicurist before. And she just starts telling me her life story, and I'm listening, and, you know, and then suddenly, like kind of mid-sentence, she stops herself and looks up, and she says, I don't know why I'm doing this. I never tell people my stuff. And I said, don't worry, I'm used to it. And yeah, you really should leave him. That's just, you know, the thing. And, you know, one of my 47 careers before I became, you know, a full-time novelist was I was in pastoral ministry to women. So in that role, you do, in fact, try to, you know, gently guide and point people to the correct choices and to give advice. That's part of what you do. You have to be a good listener, but you have to know when to speak. So, so I think the thing about Celia is she genuinely cares about her readers, and that's also me too. So many people are like, really? You read all the email? I'm like, yes. And you respond to all the email? Yes, I do. I used to have a rule that I had to respond within 48 or 24 hours. Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. I do my best. But, you know, it's just like, if they write you, you must write back, even if it's just to say, thank you so much. I really appreciate, but I read them all. Nobody, you know, does that but me. So, and she's the same way. Though Celia gets, you know, deluged in mail, only a couple of those letters are going to end up in the column. And yet she answers every single person who writes to her. And that ends up playing a big role in the book, as you know. So, so there's that aspect of it. The other part is I love advice columns. I think, I mean, who doesn't, right? There's a sort of, you know, there's a sort of prurient voyeuristic side of us that wants to read about other people's lives. But I also feel like it's kind of every woman's story. I am so good at giving other people advice. I'm a little less, you know, clear about my own issues. I can see what your issues are and exactly what you should do. A little blindsided about my own. So I felt like that was, I mean, A, it was pretty funny, but B, the reason it's funny is because we can kind of all relate to it, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there wasn't a whole lot of research you had to do because you've done it before, and, you know.
Well, I certainly read, I mean, I love advice columnists. So I certainly read different advice columnists and kind of got a sense of what did I want her style to be, you know? And Celia's style is pretty intimate. Most advice columnists don't talk about themselves ever. Celia will. She will be vulnerable and open. And I think that's part of why her audience responds to her, because she's kind of willing to give of herself, and she's willing to, and yet, you know, one of the things she sort of suffers from is she just feels like she can never quite live up to being Dear Calpurnia. And I love that you picked up so much on this. She's really having an identity crisis.
She really is. And she,
column.
as strong as she is as a character, she really is a strong character. But she has a lot of issues. She needs to let go of some of her past. She needs to move on. She needs, there's a lot of things going on, and it's brought all together within the story. And I think one of the interesting things is the title, The Restoration of Celia Fairchild. Of course, she does inherit this house that needs renovation, needs a lot of work. But it's not just the restoration of this house is that you're talking about with this.
Yes.
More so. Do you want to talk about the title?
Yeah, I really do, because the title was, when the title came to me, I kind of really got that tingling on the back of my neck that I knew it's like, this is going to be a very special book. And because it plays on a lot of things. Yes, she is restoring a house, but she's restoring her life as well. And she, there's a line that I very much liked from the book. She loses her job and she gets her column taken away, and she isn't allowed to use her pen name of Dear Calpurnia. And she talks about she had started out that day wanting to transform herself, and now it's true. She walked in the door as Dear Calpurnia. She walks out the door as Celia Fairchild, somebody who feels like somebody she knew a long time ago but had kind of lost touch with.
Right.
And so I think that is, that's actually, I swear I really did turn my phone off, and sorry, I need to just get in a different room. So sorry. So anyway, so there's that aspect of it. And yes, the house. But then the other thing too, the book is set in Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina was really at the forefront of the historic restoration movement in America. A few towns I think could claim that: Williamsburg, Virginia, Savannah, and Charleston. So like preservation and restoration is a big thing in this town. So I loved all of that it gives so many hints to the story that you're about to enter into.
It does. It really does. And it ties everything together. It really did. And you brought up Charleston. Your places that you bring people to in your books are all over the place. You don't focus on one specific area, which I really appreciate. You are in New England, you are in Wisconsin, you are in Charleston, you're all over the place. And you bring almost like it's a character in itself. I know a lot of when we do book clubs and stuff, that's a very important part of it. We talk about the setting being a character in itself. You do a great job. How do you make this happen? How do you,
well, I try to write about places that I have either a connection to or a great love for. I have been married, I don't know, 2,000 years or something like that. And I have had 24 addresses.
Oh my gosh.
In 8 different states and Mexico.
Wow.
So it turns out that this is the ideal background if you want to write books, because I can write with authenticity about pretty much any region of the United States. Now, I have not been lucky enough to live in Charleston. If I suddenly win the Powerball, there is a carriage house on Trad Street that has my name on it that I would love to have.
I love Charleston.
Love it. But I've lived in Georgia. So I understand the Southern sensibility, and I was able to, bring some of that from that time period. I have lived in Wisconsin. I have lived in Texas. I have lived in New England. I have lived in the Pacific Northwest. I've really lived just about everywhere.
And what's your favorite?
Oh, it all comes down to the people.
Okay.
At the end of the day. Home. Somebody was asking me on one of these wonderful events I've been doing over the last few days, like, what does home mean to me? And I thought it was such a good question. And I said, well, home at the end of the day is about the people I connect with. Obviously, it's about my family and wherever they are, but it's also about the friends. I am very big on kind of extending my family to my friends. But it's also about, I care about my surroundings. Decorating matters to me. I fuss a lot about you know, the kinds of bar stools that are going to go. So,
Yeah.
so it's making my home into a place where I feel comfortable and where I feel comfortable welcoming other people into my space, which of course I am looking forward to doing again very soon.
Very soon, very soon. Another thing that you bring into your books a lot is food.
Yeah. I
I'm a foodie. I really am. I love the food. And actually, I was looking, I think it's either your Facebook page or your website, and you have these mozzarella cheese sticks or some kind of
Oh no, these are the new one.
cheese straws.
They're cheese straws,
Cheese
which
straws.
is very Southern. I
Yes.
love Southern cuisine, but so I have a blog on my website called Fiercely Marie, and it's a lifestyle blog, and I post there twice a week about all kinds of things. But one of them's always going to be a recipe. And this has been fun because this month, and the first one went up yesterday. All this month there will be 4 recipes that are all Southern inspired by the book. And by the time you collect all 4 recipes, you will have an appetizer to dessert menu to go with Celia Fairchild. So I know that book clubs love to make the food that is linked or inspired by the book. So I've been putting together little book club party kits and menus for quite a while.
It's fabulous. So book clubs out there, and we facilitate several book clubs. I think it's a perfect thing to do with book clubs. So, you know, make sure your book club is reading Restoration of Celia Fairchild and go on her blog and get those recipes because it's going to be great.
Debbie can set you up with all the signed books.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So another character in the book who I loved as well was Calvin. Can you tell us how Calvin came to be? And
well,
he's everybody's best friend.
Calvin LaGuardia, in fact, is loosely based on my best friend, Mark Lipinski. Mark, although I tease him, you know, I made Calvin much better dressed than Mark. So I'll be like to Mark, I'm like, are you sure you're a gay man? Because you are a terrible dresser. So we have a lot of back and forth. He is my dearest, you know, I mean, he is my dearest friend. We live on other sides of the country now. But so Calvin is Calvin, but I kind of started with my relationship with Mark, and we talk all the time. Now, Mark isn't a cookbook editor. He's not a chef. In fact, he's a quilter, and we talk about, you know, we talk about art and fiber arts and quilts a lot. And one time my husband's like, what do you guys talk about? I'm like, well, this, that, and I was like, do you want to talk to me about my quilts? He was like, no. I was like, so God, there's a Mark.
How do you have time to still quilt? I mean, you're writing, you're, you know, doing so much.
I mean, I don't make as many quilts. Like I have this fantasy. If I could figure out a way for somebody to make a, you know, pay me to quilt, that would be awesome. So that I just have to fit it in. I get a lot of mail from people who, because I do put crafting, you know, and it's not just quilting. I mean, I never met a fiber art I didn't love. Mm-hmm. And that's very much reflected in this book. There are people who are quilting. Celia is a knitter. I knit. I don't knit as well as I quilt, but, you know, I knit well enough that I knitted a dress for one of my granddaughters for Christmas this year. So I'm coming along. I crochet, I embroider. If I could figure out a way to like fit it in my house and that my husband wouldn't want to divorce me, I would totally have a floor loom. I really want to learn to weave, but it's kind of a commitment. So I'm probably not going to be able to do that. Or he'd make me get rid of the piano, and I'm not getting rid of the piano. So, you know, that's a big a factor in my books. And I just lost the thread of what I was trying to say. So help me out here, Debbie. Where was I going with that?
I was saying, how do you have time to quilt? How do you, yeah.
So I do it in spurts, you know, okay. and so I'll do a lot between, if I have a little period of time between books, which I don't usually have much, or it's like, oh, I've got a Saturday when I don't have a bookstore event, I'm going to go up to the studio and just quilt. I do get a lot of mail from people who's like, how do you do all the things you do? Because I do a lot of stuff. I am a my planner is my friend. So I am very big on trying to use my time as efficiently as possible. I do not, I mean, I don't have spare time. I have that, even my spare time, I blocked it out. So if I want to work on a quilt, I've got to get down all my professional commitments, and then I look for holes and places where I can say, oh, you know what? There's 2 hours I actually could go and I could do this, or it's for cooking or seeing people. So every Sunday I sit down with my planner and I spend about an hour planning the upcoming week. And it seems like
That's
a lot
commitment. That's a great, very much, dedicated commitment to each of your doing it for a hobby or doing it for work. It's a great idea.
And I mean, I just time block all of the things I want to do. And when I'm really getting into it, I really love color coding. So depending on if it's a professional commitment or something else, there are different colors, which is
that's my daughter. It's that OCD going on.
It's such a beautiful thing, though.
That's
really.
right. It is. So you did say a little bit that, you're very time constrained. But one thing that I noticed there, you had a bigger break than normal between your last book and this book.
Yeah,
almost 2 years.
I needed it.
Okay. And why did you just want to take a year off? How did you decide? How did you get allowed to do that? Because press you.
You've frozen a little bit. I think I got what the question was. So really about 5 years ago, I started saying to my agent, I need a break and I need time. I'm tired. I love writing, but a book a year and sometimes more than a book a year, it's a lot. I have been on deadline for 20 years. And I just said, I have to have a break. And she said, yes, soon. And then finally, I kind of looked at her and I said, if you don't give me a break, I'm going to stop. And she is very sensible. So she knew at that point that, maybe I didn't really mean it before, but I really meant it then. I just needed to refill my creative well. And so I was supposed to take a whole year off. That was the plan. I was going to take an entire year off, which is, it's hard to do financially too. But I was going to do it. I just felt that it was important if I wanted to continue to do good work. And I do. I care that every book is as good as I can make it. Well, after about, 8-10 weeks, my agent called me up and she said, so have you started writing again? And the truth was I had. But I was doing it it was on my terms. And
it was your speed,
have an opportunity to I just had to refill my bucket, So
are you writing now again? Are you on your next book? Are you moving on now?
I am on my next book, and it will be, and I don't like to talk too much about them before they are out, but I can tell you, it was funny, until today, it was set in Maine. And then in the shower this morning, I decided it would not be set in Maine. And the problem is, I love Maine, but I haven't been able to go there. And I need to do that to get sort of the spiritual, emotional, whatever, the woo-woo connection.
Connection, right, yeah.
And I just wasn't feeling it. So I'm actually going to move a lot of the book to Oregon because it will work. So I figured out.
Have you ever written a book in Oregon?
I have written a book that was set in Seattle, but I have not written a book that was set in Oregon. So it'll be New York. It has to be partly in New York. That's very important. And in probably Oregon and Washington. So I'm still working on that. And the name of that book, and I don't mind the name because I'm pretty committed to that, is going to be Esme Cahill Fails Spectacularly.
Oh, it sounds like it's going to be another women's fiction.
That's what I do. Yeah. I mean, I have male readers, but and I'm not a fan of the term women's fiction because there's nothing called men's fiction. Right. So,
that's actually one of the things that I was going to talk about is this new genre, so to say, is this women's fiction. And for a long time, they would put women's fiction and romance, but it's really not romance either.
It's not romance. I mean, there may be, in my books, there may be a love story element. It is almost never in anything I've written. In the novellas, it's different. I've done some novellas. Those tend to be a little more romance driven because it works in a short format.
Right.
When you've only got 25 or 30,000 words, it's tricky. So,
right.
So there may be a love story element in my book, But that is not the most important dramatic question in the book. At the end of the day, it is about the personal development and growth of my female heroine.
Right.
And I want to make her life as realistic as possible. You know, sure, there can be amazing coincidences, but I have to, you know, I want my audience to say, oh yeah, that could happen. You know, so that's important that it should be believable, even if, and you know, anytime somebody does say to me, it's like, oh, that would never happen. I'll be like, honey, everything has happened. Right. You know, there are things you hear your neighbor and you're like, they wouldn't let me write about that because they'd say it couldn't have happened, and it did.
So this women's fiction genre, where did it come from? Where, I mean, would you have something else that you would call it?
I would just call it fiction. I mean, it's just fiction. The reason I think we call it women's fiction is because, so reality is almost all, as you know, you're a bookstore owner, almost all fiction is in fact read by women.
Yes.
Yes. And women read far more books in general than men, but men are less willing to read fiction. Women, when they read fiction, they will read about a male or a female protagonist. Women read thrillers. Women read horror. Women read mystery. Women read, you know, literary. They all across the steampunk. We read it, and we don't care about the sex of that main character. Men, not all, because I don't want to stereotype anyone, but reality is, you know, more often than not, men are not willing to read a book about a female main character.
And unfortunately, they also don't, you know, we have wonderful male customers, and they shy away from female authors, which, you know, we you know, fight that every day, but yep. They, you know, we're getting some to convert. We are, you know, converting some, but so we also have a feeling about calling anything women's fiction. Yeah. We don't separate it out.
It's fiction. And I think when we call it women's fiction, we make it even harder for that guy to pick up a book he might enjoy.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's talk about a couple of your other, like your quilting series. What got you started? Just your love of quilting, and what comes first?
So I wrote, my first 3 books were World War II historical fiction, and I think they were very fine books. And in fact, my very first novel, Fields of Gold, was a finalist for the Oklahoma Book Award, which is pretty good if you're not from Oklahoma, right? So I was pleased by this. Sadly, no one actually bought them. So that was a problem. But, you know, my publisher then was Kensington, just kind of stood by me when it probably would have made a world of financial sense to just cut me loose, and I would never have been able to write another word. So I've always been grateful that they just said, no, we're going to find your niche. We just haven't found it yet. And after 3 World War II, you know, historical fiction novels, I felt like I'd said what I had to say about the period. I mean, my audience did grow some during that time, but it wasn't certainly a wildly popular trajectory. I just wrote, I was living in Connecticut, and I kind of imagined the town the way I wanted it to be. There wasn't a quilt shop, so I found one. You know, I changed the name of the town. And I wrote about quilting because that's just something that was, I mean, and I want to be clear, I don't write about quilting. You can't write a novel about quilting. That's a pattern book. And sometimes people say, there's not enough quilting in your book. And I will say, you should get a pattern book. Right. This is about relationships. What works for me, and I do similar things in Celia, I found that using quilting, or in this case, crafting in Celia's, because they're doing all kinds of different things, is a really believable, organic way to get a very diverse cast of characters. And my characters are always very diverse. Their age differences, different backgrounds, different classes, different education, different races, different everything. How do you get those people into the same room in a way that doesn't feel stupid? Right?
And you do it very well.
Thank you. So, you know, I have so many friends that wouldn't be my friends if it was not for quilting and crafting, right? Our paths would not have crossed. But I have dear, dear friends who I met because, you know, I was like, does this yellow work with this if I'm in the quilt shop? And like, ask that question and 6 people are going to come over to help you pick out the fabric for your quilt. So, and you might make a friend there.
That's right. That's right. When you're, I just also want to let everybody in the audience, if you have any questions for Marie, go ahead and type them in the chat and we will get to them. So when you're writing, whether it's are you going back to any of the quilting series or are you done?
I'm going to quote something that my very dear and very, very wise friend, Debbie Maycumber, said once. Going back to an old series is like going back to an old boyfriend. It just never works out. So as much as I probably get every single day an email from somebody who says, I love the Cobbled Court books, write more of them. And I tell them that, and I'm thrilled that they liked them so much. But I feel I do, in fairness, there is one character who I think I didn't resolve her story in a perfectly satisfying way, but all the other characters are in a happy place. I think we should let them have that, don't you?
I do. And that's something about all your books is your books end happy. You have happy endings to your books. And
I make my characters suffer.
Yes.
And by the way, but that doesn't mean I'm going to always wrap it up with a bow.
No, it's
Everybody
not.
does not necessarily get the thing, it's going to start out, that character is going to have something she wants, and she may or may not get it, but she will get what she needs, because the things we want are not always the things that we need. I personally want a book that is #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So far that hasn't happened, but my life is happy, and maybe the good Lord has decided that is not what I need. Although I have these discussions with him on a regular basis about it.
But this is definitely going that way.
I hope
so. Love it. So one of your other books, the one I read right before this one, I think it was the one that was done in 2019. Hope
on the Inside.
Hope on the Inside. I really enjoyed that, and it talked about basically a lot of the effects the prison system has on female inhabitants. What kind of research did you do for that? Did you actually go to these
prison?
Did you?
I did.
And how was that?
It was very interesting. And in fact, I based the program I used on a program that is in the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Oregon. And it is pretty much the oldest inmate quilting program in the nation. And as far it is now, people have written me and say, no, you're wrong. There's others, and there are others, but this one is only female inmates. There are others where there's kind of mixed, and this is very interesting. It is all volunteer run, completely run by volunteers. So, and they've been doing it for a very, very long time. And one of the things, I always write letters at the end of my books and kind of, sharing about what's maybe some of the inspiration. And of course, there's stuff for where you can find me and contact me. But, one of my big inspirations, I said, I hope that some of you reading this will be inspired to start similar programs in your communities, because the people at the Coffee Creek Correctional actually wrote a handbook for how to do it.
Wow.
So their desire too was to see this, and it is life-changing for these inmates. It really is. So I did my research there. I went in, the inmates were not in fact allowed to know why I was there.
Okay.
And I was not permitted to interview them in any way, shape, or form. As far as they were concerned, I was a potential volunteer.
Okay.
And so I really just observed a lot. Now, when the book was out, the librarian of the facility wrote to me and said, we would love to have you come and speak. We have no budget. And I said, I would not charge you for this. Of course not. And so that I actually spent a whole day there, and I gave several talks, including I went to the medium security, and that is a very different thing. But I have to say, the book club discussion I had with the inmates of the medium security prison of Coffee Creek was the most stimulating conversation I have ever had in my many 15, 16 years of doing book club discussions. You know, and I figured it out. They have read so carefully, and it's because books are a lifeline to them. I mean, like, books are food and water, and they had really challenging questions. But of course, and I was very nervous because I just said, I was like, all right, guys, I tried my best. Like, how'd I do? And they were like, oh no, you got it. You got it.
Good.
So that was great because I was worried.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It was a great book too.
Very
good. Very good. We are having some questions. There's one from Susan, and she says she's fascinated on your writing and your style. How did you get started?
Oh, it's a really long story, so I'm going to super give you the Reader's Digest version if I can. I can tell this story for 20 minutes, but we're not. So the thing is, people often ask me, you know, did you always know you were going to be a writer? And no, but the thing is, I was a writer. The very first thing I can remember writing, I know I wasn't 6 years old, and I was in my grandmother's house, and I was trying to write a screenplay.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't know what the word was, but that's what I was trying to do. And then later I grew up, and a lot of people think that the author who wrote Bridget Jones' Diary, in fact, invented chick lit. That's not true. Julie Walker and I invented chick lit when we were 13. And it was like Sex in the City, but without the sex, because we were 13. So,
Right.
And then I grew up and I went through my sad, self-absorbed teenage poetry phase. So I wrote a lot of that. It was very deep and very tragic and pathetic. And I would hide it in my underwear drawer in my bedroom so that should I be killed in a fiery car crash, my family would find it and they would know two things. They would know, number one, they had been harboring a genius amongst them for all these years. And they would know, number two, that they had treated me very, very badly for my entire life. So,
That's right.
Right? And then I grew up and I got married and I started having all these kids seem to keep arriving on, you know, with a great deal of regularity. And so I kind of went through an Irma Bombeck phase where there was, you know, humorous glimpses of family life. And I wrote. And if I had not kind of gone on a vacation when I was about 30, when we lived in Mexico and I had just given birth to our third son, I would still just be writing for my own, but it never crossed my mind that I should submit it or do more with it. It was just what I did for me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I write, like my editor will call and she was like, okay, take that out. That was just for you. And it's true. I still write for it. I was like, yeah, that was just about me showing off. So she was like, that goes. So I ended up at this place where I was kind of on vacation and there was a writer's workshop and it met for 2 hours every day. And so I ended up wandering into this thing. And for the first 3 days, I did my little exercises. I'd never been in a room with other writers, really. And I didn't read because that was too scary. But about the third, fourth day, I was kind of listening to other people and what they wrote and then what I was writing. And I'm reading mine. I'm thinking, well, it's not terrible. And so up went my hand. And the room got totally quiet, which was, you know, nice, because when you're a 30-year-old mother of three, nobody listens to you, right? So, right? So you had people, but it wasn't like life-changing or anything. And I read a couple more times after that. The last day of the workshop, the facilitator, a gentleman, came over and he said, I need to talk to you. So you're a writer. What have you published? And I said, no, I'm not a writer. I'm a mom. I write grocery lists. And he said, you are a writer. And I said, no, I'm not. I just didn't fire my imaginary friends when I got big. And he, like, I was trying to make him laugh so he would sort of leave me alone, honestly. And he just looked at me very seriously, looked me in the eye, and he said, what do you think writers are? So he was like, you must write. You have this gift and you must write, and this needs to be your thing. And you have to go to workshops and you have to go to graduate school. And I was like, I live in the third world and I'm breastfeeding. So that's
not happening.
Thank you. And he finally said, well, I guess I will just have to teach you. And so he was the director of the graduate writing program at Colorado State University. Oh. And for 3 years, he was my mentor. I wrote a short story for him every month for 3 years without fail. This was pre-internet. So we did it. It essentially was a correspondence course. I would write a short story for him. He would comment on it, send it back, and we would, keep doing. And I learned a lot through that process, because one of the things, it's great to have natural talent, but you've got to hone it. Right. And it doesn't matter how, and I asked him one day, because I was very bold. I said, well, and we would talk on the phone like once a quarter, because it was very expensive back then to call Mexico. And I said, well, how good am I? And he said, you are as good as anybody I've ever had in my program, but if you're lazy, it won't matter. Which is like true of everything, right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
like, I should put that in a book, because that is absolutely true. It doesn't matter. If you're lazy, it doesn't matter. So I worked very hard at this. 3 years in, I kind of learned what I could learn from that system. One of my short stories started getting longer and longer. And about 70 pages in, I had this realization that it might be a book, which was terrifying. And I spent 4 years on that. And that book, in fact, ended up being Fields of Gold. When I finished it, 4 years. The beautiful part about being unpublished is you can take as long as you want to finish that book, because no one cares if you ever finish it. So I really took my time with it, and I made it as perfect as I knew how to be. At that time, I'm a better writer then than I was 16 years ago. Or, well, I guess that was 20 years ago when I was working on it. But I finished it and I put it in a drawer for an entire year, and I did nothing with it because I was terrified of rejection. And about this time, my 40th birthday was kind of coming up, which is, very clearing of the mind. And I finally realized that being rejected could not be worse than never knowing what might have been. And so I started sending the book out, and I found an agent, and I found a publisher, and here I am.
That's awesome. That's a great
it's a long story, and that's not even the long version. I'm sorry.
Michelle would like to know what your process is. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
It kind of both. So I used to be a pantser, which if you're not writing people, it means you fly by the seat of your pants and you just make the book up as you go along. And certainly that was the case with my first book. I just let it happen. And then, that book got purchased, and then I was in a 2-book contract, which required me to write an outline, and I was horrified by this. And I handed it in to my editor, and I said, it's all going to change. And she said, yes, dear, we know, but we are not going to pay you unless you give us an outline. So I was like, fine. So I have become much more enamored of outlines. So, and yet I still know that no matter how much I outline, things will change. Just today, I decided the book I've been working on for a year, I decided to change the entire state that it's in by about 3,000 miles. So, the other thing that happens with me is I write my way into the characters. I do about 8 rounds of revision. And in Celia, for example, the first chapter was the very last thing I wrote.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because I was reading it and I was like, it's good. It's not good enough. We need another scene. And also I wrote the very last chapter on the very last round of revisions. And that was, and both of those, I did have a final round of revisions that were actually much more extensive than I normally do. It was very hard because my agent, it was a good book, but it wasn't yet a great book. And my agent kind of called, and she's very involved in my process. And we're like an old married couple at this point. We've been together for 10 years, so we fight sometimes. And she was really pushing me to be more vulnerable. And I said, leave me alone. I do not write biography. And I realized that after a couple of days, I realized I needed to take that chance. So, and specifically, particularly, my father passed away last year, and he and I had a complicated relationship. And so Celia's situation is utterly different than mine, but I certainly tapped into some of my own emotional reservoir in writing that. So Wow, I answered about 14 questions.
That's what you actually have answered some of the other questions.
Water of cancer and sorry.
Well, and with part of another question, and this is from Emily. She wants to know, do you know the ending of your books when you start?
Oh yeah, that I do always know.
Okay.
It's the middle. You know, writers talk a lot about the muddy middle or the mushy middle. And when I do an outline, I do this terrible thing sometimes. And that's when they know that I really don't know. And I'll say, after a series of events, and we just move to the end. And that means I don't really know how we're, you know, I know like ABC and I know XYZ, and I don't really know anything from D to,
How to get there.
Yeah, I'll get there. Trust me, I'm a pro.
Trisha would like to know if you, how is promoting your book during the COVID period going? Is it, you know, are you liking the virtual? Do you like being in person? Is it a mixture? How is that going?
You know, it's interesting. I think there are pluses and minuses. I really do. I've always in my career, probably more than most authors, done a lot of in-person promotion because I'm good at it. Honestly, you know, it's what I'm good at. I connect well with people, which doesn't mean, like, believe it or not, I am a high functioning introvert. So I love seeing all of you people, but after this is over, I have to go lie down. It takes a lot of juice to do this, but I like getting out there with people. But I will say I have embraced the virtual stuff because I realized I have so many really, really wonderful, dedicated, passionate readers who will never be able to travel to one of my events. And so I love this, that everybody can kind of be in the virtual room, and that, Trisha, you can ask me a question, you know, not quite face to face, but pretty darn close. So that is good. Now, the question is, I don't know the answer to this. Do virtual events end up selling books? I hope so. We'll see. I refer you all to Debbie.
We have this with the signed book plates.
There we go.
Little stickers there for us.
Oh, the stickers. So the stickers say, "Books restore me." Aren't those cute?
They are very cute. They are really, really cute. It was a nice surprise when we got those in. And I also have to say that we could read your signature, because you don't know how many book plates we get, and they don't send anything with it. And we're like, who's this?
I have a pretty bad.
Thank you.
I will tell you. So if you know Debbie Maycumber, so I've said she and I are friends. Debbie, now I went to Catholic school for part of my career, and Debbie did too. Debbie has the most beautiful handwriting that you ever saw. It's exquisite. So I was at Debbie's house one day, and we were exchanging books, as authors do. And Debbie signed her book to me, and I signed the book to Debbie, and I handed it to her. And Debbie, who was the nicest woman in the world, looked down and looked up, and she went, "Really?" And I said, "It's not." I said, I know it's not my fault. I said, and it's not, don't blame the nuns. I mean, if the nuns can't give you good handwriting, Sister Judith tried her best. That's,
yes.
It's me.
But I can read it, so I was very happy. Thank you so much. So I think that's all the questions we have right now. And Marie, it's been wonderful talking to you. Everybody, please, you can call the store, you can come in, and you can order it online. That's it on this end, and we appreciate you all for joining us. And Marie, enjoy the rest of your tour. Some of it is going to be in person, and good luck with that. And we hope when we can have it in person, you'll come and join us.
I would love to. That would be great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.